They're the elections the UK was never supposed to take part in. With Brexit scheduled for March 29th, 2019, we thought we'd be out of the EU by the time the European Parliament elections took place, on May 23rd. But Brexit was delayed, and tomorrow, polling stations will bring out their ballot boxes once again. I'm Christopher Hope, the Telegraph's chief political correspondent, and this is the Brexit debate coming to you live from Westminster. This is the only time you'll see party leaders go head-to-head before tomorrow's vote. And today I'm joined by the two people heading up the parties at the top of the latest opinion polls. Sir Vince Cable, leader of the Liberal Democrats, who's hoping his calls for a second referendum will get your vote. And Nigel Farage, leader of the newly formed Brexit Party, who are campaigning for EU withdrawal on World Trade Organisation terms. Over the next 40 minutes, they'll tell you what sort of relationship they think the UK should have with Europe and why you should vote for their parties tomorrow. Once this live stream is over, you can catch up on the debate by listening to my podcast, Chopper's Brexit Podcast. Sir Vince, Nigel, thank you for joining us. Sir Vince Cable, first question to you. Why should people vote for you?
Well, the Liberal Democrats have a very clear, simple, unapologetic message, which is we want to stop Brexit. And we want to stop Brexit, primarily because of the impact on people's jobs and living standards. We've got good examples this week of how this can play out. You've got one of our two big integrated steel producers on the brink of bankruptcy because of Brexit problems, loss of European markets, 25,000 jobs going down the drain. You've got the car industry, the aerospace industry, a similarly vulnerable position with big companies and the small companies attached to them, linked to British exports within the European Union. And that's the basis on which they operate. And this problem is going to be compounded if we leave without a deal, albeit dressed up in this rather glib phrase about WTO rules. I mean, there are no rules at the moment. The system is breaking down internationally. You've got trade warfare. Britain will be pushed out into the middle of the battlefield undefended. And it isn't just about trade. We've seen this week the news of the health service. We were promised at the referendum all kind of benefits to the health service. It was a complete lie. And we now know that the health service has been very badly damaged by the exodus of large numbers of European nurses. There's a shortage in the UK. And there are the bigger issues, like the unity of the United Kingdom. No solution has been found to the problems of the Irish border. And a solution needs to be found, because otherwise we get a breakdown in the peace that was agreed and has held the line since the Belfast Agreement. But my reasons for wanting people as supporters, not simply the damage caused by Brexit, it's the positive argument for being part of the Union. Britain is a fine country. We've got a lot of assets, but we're 1% of the world population, 2% of the world economy. By working with our neighbours, we're a much more effective force in dealing, for example, with the climate emergency. And the world is a very dangerous place. You've got two superpowers running amok, Putin in Russia, Trump in America. The system is breaking apart. We have the security of a large trading group within the largest in the world. And we want to keep that. And if we want to deal with the very big companies which play games with national governments over tax, the European Union can deal with them effectively. So for positive and negative reasons, I want to stop Brexit, and I want you to vote for the Liberal Democrats to secure that.
Very good. Nigel Farage, why should people vote for your new Brexit Party?
Democracy. It's quite simple, really. We had a referendum, a full, free and fair referendum. We were told by the government the result, whatever it was, would be implemented. That couldn't have been clearer. We then had a general election in which about 85% of people voted for Labour and Conservative parties, both of whom promised they would honour the referendum and deliver Brexit. We then had 498 members of Parliament, a majority of 384, who voted for Article 50, and it went into UK law that we would leave at 11 p.m. on the 29th of March 2019 with or without a deal, agreement or new treaty. And for that now not to have happened, and to hear the argument, Vince Cable's argument that we just scrap it, get rid of it, Brexit mustn't happen at all. Either we're a democratic country, and I would have thought our great tradition was that we've always been a great democratic nation. We've spread that ethos around much of the world, particularly since 1945 with decolonisation. And I think this is a moment, whether you're a leaver or a Remainer to say promises must be kept, because if they're not, trust in the entire democratic system breaks down. So let's deliver Brexit. We have a new date now of the 31st of October. We absolutely must leave on that date if we are to be, in the eyes of the rest of the world, a credible democratic nation that obeys the rule of law.
But if it's here, well, surely, as Nigel Farage says, it's a trust issue. There was a vote in 2016. If you don't deliver on that, then what?
Well, we are a democracy. We're a parliamentary democracy, and Parliament has been unable to support the deal that the government has negotiated. Now, of course, there was a referendum, and it narrowly voted one way. But an enormous amount has happened since that referendum took place. I mean, first of all, it hasn't been possible to get a deal that solves many of the problems that, like the Irish border problem. We haven't been able to get a deal that secures free trade in the European Union through the single market and the customs union. Many of the assumptions on which the referendum took place have fundamentally changed. As for the state of democracy, and I believe in democracy, those countries that do make use of referendums to support their parliamentary system, I mean, Switzerland is a good example, will have a confirmatory referendum once the terms of an arrangement have been negotiated. And that's the way forward. I mean, we could, of course, Parliament just cancel Brexit, but I agree that wouldn't be an ideal solution by any means.
And would you
That's why we have to go back to the public.
Vince, would you? I mean, let's just say that it absolutely came to the wire ahead of the 31st of October, and you faced a choice, which was us leaving on WTO terms or just revoking Article 50. Which would you do?
I would revoke Article 50.
So democracy isn't really that deep in your bones, is it?
It is deep in my bones.
Is it?
I don't accept that what you call WTO terms is a viable alternative.
What do we vote for in the referendum? We voted to leave. And what is interesting is every leading player on both the Leave and the Remain side in the run-up to that referendum said the implications of leaving were we leave the customs union and we leave the single market. It couldn't have been clearer. And you talk about a deal, no deal going through Parliament. What Mrs May's tried to do is to give us a new European treaty. I don't want that either. Vince, I come from the world of business. You know that. I spent 20 years.
As I do.
I know absolutely. I spent 20 years involved in the global commodities business. I've always wanted us to have a sensible free trade agreement with our European neighbours. The problem is Mrs May never asked for it. And my view is this. If we now say to the European Union, we're not having that treaty. It's failed 3 times in Parliament. It's never going to get through. We give notice. We are leaving on the 31st of October on WTO terms. If you want to come and talk to us about a deal without tariffs or quotas, we're open. And I think in that situation, we get a free trade deal without political linkage. But let me ask you, wouldn't that honour the result of the referendum?
No, you must be much clearer about what you mean by offering a free trade deal. We've got one already. The single market, supported by the customs union.
Customs union is not a free trade deal because it binds us across the rest of the world.
But it prevents tariffs being erected on the supply chains across Europe. Now, you say you want WTO terms. I mean, the WTO is a wonderful international institution with very high principles. The rule of international trade law is at the moment disintegrating. You've got trade warfare between the United States and China. Where is the World Trade Organization? It plays no role whatever in mediating between the two. There is a battlefield out there that we would be wandering into. I mean, what you're effectively saying, if we translate it into defence terms, we get rid of our army, get rid of NATO, we can rely on the United Nations to pass some resolution to support us. The World Trade Organization rule of law no longer exists.
Well, I just want to ask, get one thing clear here. We do not have a free trade deal with the European Union. That is wrong. It costs us up to 15 billion quid a year to be part of it. And far from free trade, it puts tariffs on 12,500 household goods. Everything from kids' shoes that are made in Vietnam to cut flowers that come in. So we haven't got a free trade deal. And as for your argument about the world, look, I just take the view that as the 5th biggest economy in the world, speaking English with our friendships in the Commonwealth and America, I think we can do better negotiating our own trade deals than the European Commission can do on our behalf. I believe in Britain, I believe we're good enough to do this.
Next question, Nigel Farage, what are your most eye-catching policies?
Well, the most eye-catching policy is that if you vote for us this Thursday, you will fundamentally shift the political debate in this country. The first thing you will do is you'll put a proper, clean break Brexit back on the table for the 31st of October, and I've little doubt that this will dominate the Conservative leadership contest over the course of the summer, so that debate will begin again. I also think that if we get, and it may not happen, but if we get a big win for the Brexit Party, we'll kill off all thought of a second referendum because Vince's side will realise they simply can't win it. And I also think that if these opinion polls we're looking at this morning are anything like right, we'll get rid of Mrs May incredibly quickly. We may even see the end of Jeremy Corbyn too. So there are lots of very good reasons, I think. So vote for the Brexit Party, because what we're going to do is we're going to shift the centre of gravity of this debate. There's been too much for the last 3 years of what Westminster wants, and to hell with the country. The country now has a chance to speak.
Vince Cable, your most eye-catching policies.
Well, Stop Brexit is pretty eye-catching. But actually the policies we need can only happen if Brexit stopped. I mean, the country is completely paralysed. The government isn't functioning, Parliament isn't functioning. There are massive problems out there to do with homelessness, crime, the lack of productivity in the economy. We cannot get on dealing with them as long as this Brexit issue hangs around. And if it happens, we then spend years negotiating these trade deals that Nigel has been talking about. I want us to have stability and security. We get that within the European Union. And as for the eye-catching policies, if we stay in the European Union, we can do something serious about the climate emergency. I don't know that Nigel believes in it, but for most people, well, negotiating more effective international agreements, having an approach to decarbonisation within the European Union that prevents unfair competition between member states based on cheap energy. There's a very clear way of doing it and makes the climate emergency dealt with seriously. And the other thing I want to see happening, something I was doing in government, is actually delivering on the next stage of the single market. This was a great British achievement. I mean, we're often told that the Commission imposes policies on Britain. One of the biggest projects in Europe, the single market, was British. We delivered it. It isn't complete. I want to see, in addition to opening the markets for services, 80% of our economy, preserving the standards which many of our manufacturing companies have, actually opening it up to the digital economy, which is where we're heading. I started negotiating this when I was in government. A line is now being drawn under it if Brexit happened. It isn't going to happen. One of the great British achievements will simply be shredded.
Okay.
It sort of sounds like, when you listen to this stuff, it sounds like the entire UK economy is utterly dependent on our trade with the European Union. Let's just get some very simple facts here. 12% of the entire UK economy are exports of goods and services to the European Union. Now, I'm not saying that's not important, but here's the point about the single market and why it's absolutely wrong, uncompetitive and bad for this country. Because we're members of it, the legislation we have to abide by, and I mean, Parliament over the road has not for 45 years really regulated British industry. It's done by Brussels. So the 88% of our economy that doesn't trade with Europe is bound by European rules. That, to me, is madness. I think, when it comes to financial services or whatever industry you can think, that we should be making our own laws appropriate to our own circumstances.
What are your policies? And the problem with you have is you are one word, Brexit, and beyond that, no one knows if you're high tax and spend, your policy on schools, defence, transport. Well, with Vince Cable, and to be fair to Vince, he has a proper manifesto. It's got a rude word in the front. But what are your policies?
Well, we'll come to that, I'm sure. The coarsening of debate, extraordinary.
What are your policies?
Chris, we're fighting a European election, and I'm sick year after year. Whenever a European election comes around, everyone tries to cloud the issue by talking about
clouding the issue.
Cloud the issue by talking about important domestic policies. I've laid out already large-scale political reform in this country. I did some of that last night at Olympia.
Cut that.
I also have laid out that we will be the one party on the side of the 5.4 million small businesses, 95% of whom have never traded with the European market in their life and are bound by single market rules. But let's not get distracted. This election on Thursday is an important election. We're 3 years on from a referendum and we're giving our opinion. We're giving our opinion on the European Union. And I suppose, in a sense, we're the one party here with a very clear position. Vince's position is clear too. As for Labour or Conservative, I mean, why would anyone vote for them? Because goodness knows what they stand for.
But Vince Cable, how do you take that? It's very hard to fight Nigel Farage when it's basically got no policies to hit at?
Well, I think you've summarised it in a sentence. I mean, you do need to have a clear set of policy for the UK. I mean, we're in difficulties on a whole variety of fronts, and the government simply isn't functioning. And I mean, what Nigel Farage doesn't explain is what happens if we leave over the next few years. You want a free trade treaty with the European Union or the World Trade Organization. This is going to take years to negotiate. The whole administrative machinery of the government is engaged in this massive project. I want it to stop and get on with the things that really matter to this country.
Well, Vince, I tell you what, rather than shouting from the sidelines, what I'm now saying in this election is I want to take some responsibility. All right?
Good. Well,
I think
I'm glad.
I think it would be
progress.
reasonable.
Yeah.
I think it would be reasonable if these polls are half right, if we win these elections and win them well, we have a democratic mandate for the UK leaving on the 31st of October. I want Brexit Party MEPs, and bear in mind, you know, I've got people running for us who've run FTSE 250 companies, deal makers, entrepreneurs, some serious business. I want us to be part of that negotiating team so we can prepare this country properly for whatever we need to do so we can deliver the democratic mandate on the 31st of October.
Can I ask you, would British Steel be safer in or outside the European Union?
Well, it would be safe for him. But that's
Despite
absolutely
what's
clear.
going on at the moment.
I mean, it's not just British Steel. I mean, the other half of the steel industry, or what remains of it in South Wales, is similarly very dependent on the European Union single market. And of course, as Nigel says, there are large numbers of small companies, but many of these small companies are part of supply chains, and they meet the demand which is created by our trade with the European Union. And not just the trade with the European Union. We have trade agreements already negotiated on our behalf with about 70 other countries, including very important ones like Japan. Those become forfeit once we leave.
British Steel's in trouble because we're in the European Union. It is the European Emissions Trading Scheme that got the company into its financial difficulties. It is the ridiculous, and I'm not a protectionist, but the ridiculous dumping by China of steel over the last few years.
But it was the British government that blocked anti-dumping
increase
acts.
their market share. And right now, today, if we wanted, as a nation, to put money in to save British Steel, we're not allowed to because of EU state aid.
We
rules.
are allowed. I administered
I am saying
industry policy for 5 years.
The decision as to whether let British Steel go under or save it should be a decision taken by us, not the European
Commission. If we had
Commission.
left on March 29th, could we save British Steel
Yes,
today?
absolutely, we could. And now we can't, because it's the European Commission who we can't vote for and can't remove, and it's their decision.
Do you blame Vince Cable for
I
that?
was responsible for industry policy for 5 years. Numerous state aid cases came up. In not a single case were we turned down.
Where is the power, Vince? Was it your decision or ultimately the European Commission?
Well, of course, we had to get the support of the European Commission.
Their decision, not
for
yours.
perfectly good reasons.
But it's their decision,
to
not
prevent
yours.
unfair competition.
Come on, be honest
within
about
Europe.
it. The ultimate decision was theirs, not yours.
The ultimate decision
Let Vince
was,
reply.
and with the effective lobbying of my government and Parliament, we won the case every time.
And what if you'd lost?
Well, there are good reasons why the European Union wants to stop damaging subsidy competition in Europe. It's a good policy.
Well, that's fine. But I think we should be in charge of that, not them. It's simple.
I mean, Nigel's saying that British Steel might go bust because we're in the EU.
Well, in this case, it isn't the case. Large numbers of jobs are going to go, large number of companies are going to go bust as a result of Brexit, and particularly the no-deal Brexit, which Nigel Farage now entertains.
I'm sorry, Vince. This is really important. No, he's wrong. This is really... Look, what I do agree with Vince on is this. Brexit uncertainty is leading to, investment stalling.
It is.
So what we need to do is leave and get on with the rest of our lives, get some certainty, let business know where it stands. But on British Steel, I'm going to repeat this point. I'm sorry, but I'm going to repeat this point. Today, the British government is impotent. We cannot do anything to save British Steel because the European Commission won't let us.
Moving on, Vince Cable, what are your MPs like and how will they behave in the European Parliament?
Well, I think the first thing, and I would expect them to turn up. And I would expect them to earn their salaries and their allowances by doing a job. And if, as I expect, we're going to stay in the European Union, they've got 5 years of work. And I think there are certain things I particularly want them to do. I mean, they're going to work within the group of Liberal MEPs and hopefully also work with, similarly minded parties, moderate Conservatives, Social Democrats, in order to stand against the xenophobic, extreme, anti different nationalistic parties that are springing up across Europe. And we want to be very clear that we are confronting that evil tendency. I mean, Nigel has not made it absolutely clear, I think, whether he's going to sit with them or not, but perhaps he'll clarify in his answer.
Well,
and I then want to get our MEPs to get on with the meticulous problems of legislation. You know, in the past, British MEPs from my party, you know, got deeply engaged with the rules around financial services, a crucial industry for the UK, its revenue and employment. And we succeeded in making sure that the financial services rules of the single market operate in British interests. If we're out of the room, they no longer do. They operate in the interests of France and Germany. We participated as parliamentarians in negotiating, for air quality standards, which is a massive issue now in cities. It's a massive issue around the expansion of the airport. And it's European rules that set those high standards and hold us to. So our MEPs will do a serious job of work.
Okay, now Nigel Farage, what's the point of the Brexit Party's MEPs?
Oh, I've been hearing this
Literally,
argument. I've been hearing this argument for 20 years. Oh, Nigel, you'll never do anything being an MEP, but I think I have actually helped raise the level of debate in this country, if not in the European, if not in the chamber in Strasbourg, which, as Mr. Juncker always says, thank goodness you're here, Nigel, you make it more interesting. I really, well, it has been quite fun. I genuinely believe that the list of candidates the Brexit Party has put up is the most remarkable list of candidates that's been seen in modern times. Firstly, for their diversity, and I use that in every sense of the word. They represent modern Britain absolutely in every way. But also their diversity of political opinion. Because we've got people on the left, we've got people on the right. We've got people with ministerial experience.
The far left and right.
Yeah, we've got, but this is the point, you see. Actually, whether you want to be a self-governing, independent, democratic nation, it's not a left-wing or a right-wing thing. So I think what we've done here is to present a remarkable list of candidates. Within them, some very successful entrepreneurs who, as I said, I want to be part of the government's negotiating team to get us ready. And we will go to Brussels and Strasbourg. We won't be there long because we're leaving on the 31st of October. This is perfectly clear. And I hope that what will happen is my own group in the European Parliament, the EFDD group, will continue and we'll work with people, again, from across the spectrum.
You found one on LinkedIn, they're business people, they're not actually people. You've been going 5 weeks. Well,
Brian Monteith was in the Scottish Parliament. You've got Anne Widdecombe, obviously, was in the British Parliament. There are 3 of us who've been MEPs before. So we don't have that much political experience. And I will admit to that. But I do think...
Is that a problem?
I do think this. I do think we need to have people in politics who are not career politicians. And I think, frankly, the front benches in Westminster, there are too many people there who've come straight out of Oxbridge into politics. And Vince would probably agree with me on that. So I do think what we've got is a very interesting crowd of people who will make good public representatives.
Well, I'm delighted to hear about this nice multicultural,
far more than
diverse team.
Far more than your list.
I think not. But anyway, but you, to be honest, you have played a role in whipping up this antagonism to foreigners, the nationalism which is part of Europe.
Are you on about?
Well, in the referendum, you told us that next year, 2020, Turks are going to be free to come to this country. A lot of people were alarmed by something that is patently untrue. You put out that advertisement, the hoarding,
that wasn't about
showing immigrants who had dark faces. I mean, I welcome people with dark faces. I was married to one. But people coming in from Europe are Europeans. It was giving a totally false picture of what immigration actually amounts to. So I'm glad that you're now being more inclusive. But that's not your record.
You're right. I've taken terrible stick on this. I mean, when Romania joined the European Union with full access, I said this was a huge mistake. It was a country that had not made the full transformation to Western democracy, and I believe that 250,000 would come from Romania. And I was screamed and shouted at. How dare I scaremonger? The last figure I saw is 411,000. And all I've ever argued with immigration is that we should have a free, fair system that stops discriminating against India and against Australia in favour of Romania or anywhere else. So actually, what I've been arguing for is a points-based immigration system on a global basis, and yes, to restrict the numbers to sensible terms. And I utterly reject the idea that I try to stir anything up. Actually, the truth of it is, when the public feel immigration's under control, tensions decrease, not increase.
How do you get past the criticism that to your party, your supporters, that it's racist to support the Brexit, the WTO policy you're pursuing?
Well, actually, it's quite the opposite, because, as I say, once you've got the ability to strike your own trade deals, to decide your own immigration policy, you're potentially reaching out to a bigger world than just Europe. So, far from being racist, actually, we really are more internationalist than those that want our whole future decided by the EU.
Nigel, next question to you. How will you help the country get past Brexit?
Well, there is a problem in this country, and it's this, that civilised democracy only works if you have the loser's consent. So we have an election, and the loser says, look, I don't like the result, but I accept it because we're a free and fair country. What has happened here is we've had the greatest democratic exercise in the history of the nation. And we've got senior figures, and even 2 former prime ministers, Vince himself, people who refuse to accept the result of that referendum. And I'm afraid they've given the impression by saying that those that voted for Brexit didn't understand what they were voting for. And we're thick, we're stupid, we're ignorant, we're racist. These are all the things that have been said. And it's given people a sense that those who voted Remain feel morally superior to those who voted Leave. And I think one of the reasons we've got such appalling behaviour on our streets, this new militant Remainer type, and goodness me, their behaviour, I hope Vince will condemn some of it, because the behaviour out there right across the country is vile, is because they genuinely think, because they're superior to the Leavers, they can do whatever they like. And that's why we've got the division we've got today. I genuinely think the sooner we get Brexit delivered, the sooner people accept there's a new reality, that's when we can start coming back together again. But I honestly think that we're in a bad place right now. I genuinely do.
OK, Vince, how can you help the country move on, given that another referendum is more uncertainty for years to come?
Well, let me deal with the last point. I condemn the attack on you the other day, unreservedly.
That's a small part of it.
It isn't just a small part of it. I think, actually, in public life, we get a lot of unpleasantness. I've had spitting in the street, excrement through the door. It's public life. Don't you think you've been a bit precious in pressing charges?
No, this is not about me. This is not about me.
Well, why are you pressing charges?
But do you think putting bollocks to Brexit? Do you think putting bollocks to Brexit on your leaflet is doing anything but coarsening the debate?
It's honest. It's straightforward. It's the language which ordinary people who you claim to represent
you've never done anything like this in your career before, have you?
I'm an ordinary human being, and I use common language. But the question that you put to us, how do we move on? The way we move on is by stopping it, and we stop it in a democratic way by going back to the people and giving them the choice of whether they wish to accept the government's deal or to stay.
And when we vote to leave again, will you just ignore it again?
I will not. I will accept the result.
Really?
Absolutely clear.
Well, why not the last one,
because this is a confirmatory referendum. It is a fundamentally different question from the last.
So what's the question?
But you want us...
So what's the question, Vince?
Well, there are 2 fundamental...
Go on.
There are 2 deals on it.
Give me the question.
The government's deal and the deal we've already got. I know you want the WT option. If that's... I'm perfectly comfortable with that we take that on and we debate it as well as another option.
So what's your question? Is it Remain versus no deal if you had a referendum?
Well, no deal, I think, should be on the ballot paper. I've no problem with that. But in terms of how we move on, I think 2 fundamental issues need to be addressed. There are a lot of people who have been angry, left behind. It's not a simple north-south issue. Some of the biggest northern poor cities voted to Remain. And some of the prosperous, relatively elderly bits of the home counties were to leave. It's not a simple north-south issue, but there are left-behind areas, seaside resorts, small northern towns, Welsh valleys, and we need to concentrate a lot of resource and a lot of effort on helping them. That's the first priority. Okay. And I think we've also got to bind the country together. It is becoming extreme, polarised, and this is fundamentally a decent, tolerant country.
Okay.
And we've got to unite to exclude the xenophobia and the nationalism.
If we stop Brexit, do you think 17.4 million people are going to say, oh, that's all right then?
There's going to be angry people on both sides, and that's why it's got to be resolved through a vote.
There's more. I tell you what, there are more people with passion on the Leave side than there are on the Remain side.
Isn't the case that Vince Cable is an MP, can influence policy, you can't? And
I don't know about that.
Voters, they're sick of politicians doing stuff then legging it, like David Cameron did the vote and then cleared off. this for you, it's risk free because you can have this. If it goes wrong on Brexit, you can go off and go fishing or do whatever you want to do. I mean, it's all right for you, isn't it? But you're taking a big risk here with people's lives.
I think
with the WTO Brexit,
this is about freedom, independence, democracy. I mean, I can't put a price on those things. These things are so important. Generations that went before us fought for them. That's what we're talking about here. We were given a choice in that referendum. We decided, and career politicians are trying to prevent it. I think the whole thing's an outrage.
It's been Cable.
I think it would be an outrage if we left under present circumstances. So we have to go back to the public and giving them a choice, a final say. You said you want the no deal WTO option on the ballot paper, and I no problem with that. And I don't understand quite what you're afraid of. I mean, if the support for you and your party if your party is so confident, you're going to win again, so why not take it on?
My problem is you people. My problem is, even if we vote again to leave, I don't think you'll accept it. I don't think many in Westminster will accept it. So what we've got to do here, and what I'm now trying to do, the Brexit Party is far more ambitious than anything I ever did before. This is now, this Thursday, tomorrow, is a start. We're going to go on and try and win the Peterborough by-election. We want to break the two-party system and get a parliament that reflects the country. Then a referendum result would actually be
Would you stand
delivered.
in to be an MP?
We're going to field 650 candidates across the country.
And you're one of them?
Of course. Of course. I mean, look, the whole system, the House of Lords, patronage, the type of people that sit on the Electoral Commission, the whole Westminster thing is corrupt and rotten to the core.
I'm certainly with you in fundamental political reform. Your party, my party, should be much more represented in the House of Commons. Elected House of Lords, absolutely with that. We need fundamental reform, but that's not the issue we're faced with today.
Well, we've got some questions here from Twitter, from our and also from emailing us. I'll ask you both. What do you admire most about Nigel Farage, Vince Cable?
Well, I think we've seen a bit of humour today. It's something I do like in people.
And about Vince Cable.
I've always said about Vince Cable that Vince Cable's one of those people in the streets of Westminster who will cross the road and come and say good morning to you. And we've known each other a very long time. We've always got on well. I've always thought Vince is very, very civil, and I'm amazed his party have forced him into using this horrible slogan.
The results are out on Monday morning, early hours. How will you spend your 3 days off, Vince Cable?
Well, I'm going to Wales. I'll be preparing for
MP,
another by-election, which is almost certainly coming in Brecon. But I'll be taking a few days off climbing in the Welsh mountains.
Okay. And Nigel Farage, what's your plan?
Well, I have been for the last 5.5 weeks pretty much sort of on the leash and very well behaved and off the beer. So there are two things I'm going to do. One, go to the pub, and two, I've got a fishing trip organised, which I'm looking forward to hugely.
If I ask you both, Vince Cable, will we leave the EU on October 31st?
No, I don't think so.
Nigel Farage.
If we don't, then you can watch even bigger political change in the UK than you can believe possible.
Now, we've just got time for a sum up for Nigel Farage, so would you just give 1 minute to the camera on why they should vote for you?
This is a big, important European election, probably the most important one since 1975 when these began. I think this is about democracy, it's about trust in politics, it's about the competence of people that we elect at all levels of politics in this country. And I'm appealing to you, whether you voted leave or remain, it is vital that promise that was made to the people, that the referendum result will be implemented. It is vital that happens. Otherwise, this country will never be the same place again.
And Vince Cable, your minute to the camera.
I want you to vote for the Liberal Democrats to stop Brexit. We're very clear about what the objective is. It will do great damage to the country's economy, particularly if we leave without a deal, as is now being proposed. We want to reunite the country. We've got to address some of the big inequalities within it. We've got to heal the massive division, the hate that has followed the Brexit vote, the rise in hate crime. We've got to get together as a country and get past that. And in order to do it, we've got to stop Brexit. We've got to do it democratically through a people's vote. So support the Liberal Democrats, and that's where we go.
Well, that's it. You've heard the best arguments from the Brexit Party and the Liberal Democrats. The polls are open tomorrow, so you can have your say and vote. You can, of course, follow all the latest updates at telegraph.co.uk. And for all things Brexit, please listen to my podcast, Chopper's Brexit Podcast, for free on the Telegraph's website, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favourite podcast app. A new episode is out every week, and you can listen for free wherever you normally down your podcasts. But thank you for joining us. Goodbye.